Brothers, sisters, comrades, let the world know this. What you were never meant to hear is now breaking the silence. In the marble halls of the United Nations, where the powerful polish their lies and the weak are told to bow, a young voice rose. It was not the voice of compromise. It was not the voice of submission. It was the roar of Africa itself, the defiance of centuries compressed into minutes of fire. They told him, "Speak politely." He answered, "I will speak truth." They whispered, "Hide our crimes." He declared, "The world must know." This speech, this forbidden speech, was not broadcast on your screens. Cameras were cut, translations silenced, headlines twisted. Why? Because one man named the empire, named the theft, named the chains still fastened on Africa. And in that hall of nations, the silence of the powerful was louder than thunder. Tonight, you will hear what they tried to erase. Tonight, we enter the speech that ignited a fire in 43 African nations. Tonight, we break the chains of silence. This is not just politics. This is prophecy. This is the storm they fear. Brothers and sisters, I want you to remember this moment as if you were there. The chamber was not empty, and it was crowded with flags, with diplomats, with men and women who believed they ruled the future of nations. And yet, as I rose to speak, it was not noise that greeted me. It was silence, heavy, suffocating silence, the kind of silence that comes when truth is about to be spoken, when every liar feels his heart tremble, when every thief senses the moment of exposure. They expected another speech of obedience, another polished script written in Paris, in Washington, in London. They expected Africa to once again bow her head and thank the empire for chains disguised as aid. But that day, the mask was shattered. I looked across that hall and I saw two worlds. On one side, the polished faces of those who drained our lands, whose suits carried the perfume of stolen oil, stolen gold, stolen uranium. Men who smile while villages starve, who clap for themselves while children dig minerals with bleeding hands. On the other side, I saw the tired eyes of Africa, our representatives who had forgotten their courage, who carried their passports but not their pride, who had been trained to nod instead of roar. And I asked myself, if not now, when? If not me, who? The silence deepened as if the very walls of the UN were holding their breath. Cameras turned, translators prepared, but the weight of centuries pressed on my chest. I felt the shadows of empire watching me, whispering in the corners, waiting for me to stumble, to soften, to beg. But I did not stumble. I did not beg. I stood not as Ibrahim Traoré, but as the echo of every African voice buried under colonial dust, every ancestor who had died nameless in mines and plantations, every soldier who had fought in foreign wars only to return in chains. The silence before my words was not emptiness. It was the storm gathering its first winds. It was the pause before the roar of the lion. And when I opened my mouth, it was not for applause. It was for truth. The silence they loved so much, the silence that hides their crimes, that buries our dead, that erases our history. That silence was broken. And in that instant, in that breath, in that hall of nations, the empire knew Africa was not coming to whisper anymore. Africa was coming to roar. Brothers, sisters, comrades, I want you to see it as I saw it. The hall of nations, the marble and glass, the flags hanging like trophies of conquest. In that chamber sat men and women who believed they had mastered history. They came with their speeches of comfort, their agreements of control, their polished lies wrapped in the language of diplomacy. But wait, and I rose, silence fell, not the silence of respect, no, the silence of fear, the silence that arrives when the guilty know the truth is about to walk into the light. They expected another servant of empire, another African leader trained to kneel, to thank his oppressors for crumbs falling from golden tables. They expected me to read their script, written in Paris, in Washington, in London. They thought I would play the part of the obedient son before the fathers of empire. But I was not there to bow. I was not there to flatter. I was there to break the silence. I looked across that hall, and I saw two worlds staring back at me. One, the empire, dressed in fine suits, smiling as if history belonged to them, hands perfumed with the oil they had stolen, the diamonds they had smuggled, the uranium mined by starving children. They sat like kings disguised as diplomats, believing Africa would forever be their mine, their farm, their graveyard. And I saw the other world, my African brothers, my African sisters, sitting with tired eyes, some lowered, some unsure, some afraid to remember the roar of their ancestors. They carried their flags, but not their courage. Their seats were filled, but their spirits were missing. In that silence, I felt the weight of centuries pressing against my chest. The shadows of empire whispered, "Stay quiet, do not disturb the order, speak softly, so the chains do not rattle." But my soul refused. I did not stand there as one man. I stood as millions. I stood with the cries of those who died nameless in mines and plantations, with the blood of those who fought in foreign wars, with the mothers whose children dig cobalt with broken fingers. I was not Ibrahim Traoré. I was Africa refusing to be silent. And when I opened my mouth, the silence cracked. It cracked like glass under a hammer. It cracked like chains snapping in the night. It cracked with a roar not meant for applause, but for truth. That was the moment the empire understood. Africa had come to speak no longer as a whisper, but as thunder. The silence before my words was the silence before a storm, and I came to bring the storm. Brothers and sisters, hear me well, for when I began to speak, the masks fell from the faces of those who pretend to be saviors. The empire was naked, its crimes no longer hidden in shadows. I called their names, I revealed their theft, I laid bare the blood that stains their hands. I told them, "You are not here as guardians of peace, you are here as merchants of war." I told them, "You do not bring aid, you bring chains. You do not build, you plunder. You do not teach, you poison." The chamber trembled, not with applause, but with discomfort. Eyes shifted. Pens stopped moving. Translators hesitated, wondering if they were even allowed to carry my words into other languages. But the truth marched forward like soldiers who refused to retreat. I spoke of the stolen gold, the oil drained from our soil, the diamonds ripped from the earth while our children starved. I spoke of how they send loans with one hand and take tenfold with the other. How they build military bases not to protect us but to guard their theft. How their banks overflow while African villages live in darkness. I told them the truth they despise. The empire does not want Africa free. The empire wants Africa weak, divided, dependent. For a free Africa terrifies them more than any army. And I looked them in the eye as I said it. The representatives of nations who bomb, who exploit, who steal. They shifted in their seats. They adjusted their ties, some turned their faces away, but they could not escape the mirror I was holding before them. And then I spoke of dignity. I said, Africa will no longer kneel. We will no longer carry bowls of begging rice while our soil grows abundance. We will no longer send our sons to die in foreign wars while our own lands cry out for defenders. We will no longer let the IMF write our future, nor let NATO dictate our destiny. I did not speak these words for applause. I spoke them because they are the marrow of truth. And I saw in that chamber, yes, I saw it, sparks in the eyes of African delegates who had forgotten their fire. Some clenched their fists beneath their desks. Some straightened their backs. Some, for the first time, remembered that they were not born to bow. The empire was exposed, their robes of false morality torn apart by words sharper than swords. They came with shadows. I came with the sunrise. And as my words echoed across that hall, I knew, even if the cameras cut, even if the news remained silent, the empire could not unhear what was spoken. The chains had been named, the thief unmasked, the silence broken, and Africa, for the first time in a long time, stood visible in the light of truth. Comrades, brothers, sisters, I told them this with no hesitation. Africa will not kneel again. For too long they have trained us to bend our backs, to hold out empty bowls, to recite their prayers of dependency. They gave us chains and called them partnerships. They gave us debt and called it aid. They gave us soldiers and called it protection. But let the record show that era has ended. I told them in that hall, we are not children of pity, we are children of warriors. Our soil bleeds uranium, gold, diamonds, cobalt, yet we are made to kneel and beg for bread. Is this justice or is this mockery? They want Africa kneeling because a kneeling man cannot fight, a kneeling nation cannot resist. But I rose that day to remind them, Africa's spine is unbroken. I spoke of the IMF, the machine of debt that strangles our economies. They lend us $1 and demand 10 back, leaving our schools empty, our hospitals hollow, our youth jobless. I spoke of NATO, which turns our lands into battlegrounds, which sells us weapons while preaching peace, which builds bases not to protect Africans, but to guard their plunder. And I told them this truth: we will no longer kneel before the altar of their approval. If they deny us loans, we will build with our own hands. If they withhold their technologies, we will forge our own. If they refuse us partnership, we will unite as nations, not as beggars. The chamber grew restless. Some smiled with contempt, others shifted uncomfortably. But I could see the empire does not fear our poverty, it fears our unity. A sovereign Africa terrifies them because it means the sunrise of a world where they no longer rule unchallenged. So I said it plainly: we do not ask for freedom, we declare it. Freedom is not a gift wrapped in Western promises. Freedom is taken, defended, and lived. And on that day, in that chamber of nations, Africa lifted its head. For once we did not beg, for once we did not kneel, for once we declared the age of submission is over. Brothers, listen well, for the truth of that moment was not only in my words, but in the faces around me. When my voice rose against empire, the hall itself became a battlefield of reactions. I saw Western diplomats whispering behind papers, pretending to take notes while their hands shook. Some avoided my eyes, staring at the floor as if truth itself was too heavy to meet. Others smirked, the arrogance of centuries still dripping from their lips, but even their smirks faltered when my words carried the weight of millions. Yes, some walked out. They thought by leaving they could silence me. But tell me, can you walk out of history? Can you walk out of the roar of a people rising? Their absence was proof enough. They were guilty, and guilt always flees the courtroom of truth. But let me tell you what moved me most. The quiet fire in the eyes of African delegates, men and women who had come to New York with their spirits dulled by diplomacy, their courage drowned in protocol. And yet, as my words echoed, I saw them straighten their backs. I saw fists clenched under desks. I saw eyes water with the memory of ancestors. Some nodded slowly, as if remembering the taste of freedom. Others remained still, but I knew their silence was no longer the silence of fear, but the silence of awakening. Even beyond Africa, there were murmurs. Delegates from nations long bullied by empire, from Latin America, from Asia, from the Middle East, they watched closely. They recognized in my words the same chains that bind them. They knew the struggle of Africa is not isolated. It is the struggle of the global South, the struggle of every nation told to kneel while others feast. The hall was split in two that day, not east versus west, not north versus south, but oppressor versus oppressed, masters of empire versus nations demanding dignity. And though cameras would later cut, though headlines would later erase, I knew in that moment the empire had lost the chamber. They had lost control of the silence. For in those hidden reactions, in the clenched fists, the restless movements, the silent nods, I saw the seed of rebellion. And once a seed is planted, brothers, it does not die, it grows. Now hear me, for this is the clearest proof of all. If my words were harmless, they would have been broadcast everywhere. If my speech was weakness, they would have played it on repeat to mock me. But what did they do? They cut the cameras, they silenced the translators, they buried the truth under headlines of distortion. They said he was angry, they said he was reckless, they said he was dangerous. But brothers, if a man speaks lies, why fear his voice? If a man is weak, why silence him? It is only truth they bury, because truth is the one weapon that cuts deeper than any sword. I stood in that hall and told the world what they did not want you to hear, that their banks are built on African gold, their electricity on African uranium, their luxury on African sweat. I told them their democracy is hypocrisy, their peace is war in disguise, their aid is chains polished to shine like gifts, and they move swiftly to erase it. News agencies trimmed my speech into fragments. Headlines twisted my words into caricatures. Social media filters hid the fire, replacing it with shadows. They wanted the world to forget before the fire could spread. But here is the secret of empire. Censorship is confession. To silence is to admit guilt. And every attempt to erase my words only proved that they carried the power to awaken. I told them, and I tell you now, the more they bury the truth, the louder it will rise. You can cut the cameras, but you cannot cut the memory of a people. You can silence translators, but you cannot silence the mother telling her son why he is hungry while his land is rich. You can twist headlines, but you cannot twist the sunrise. The empire believes it holds the shares, a pen that writes history, but what they forget is this: the people are the ink, and once spilled, it cannot be contained. And so, though they tried to erase my words, here we are, speaking them again, sharing them again, spreading them beyond their walls, beyond their headlines, beyond their power. This speech, the one they called forbidden, is not erased. It is alive, and every time it is spoken, it grows. They tried to bury it, but like a seed, it was only planted deeper. And from the soil of silence, it will rise, as the roar of nations, as the dawn of Africa, as the breaking of chains. Brothers, sisters, comrades, let me tell you the truth of that moment. I did not stand in that chamber believing I was only one man. No, I stood there knowing that one spark, if it touches dry grass, can burn down the mightiest forest. And that day, my words were the spark. The empire believed my speech would die in silence, buried under their censorship, hidden from the screens of the world. But the truth is this: words born from courage cannot be caged. They travel faster than cameras, stronger than headlines, deeper than the walls of marble. They find ears, they find hearts, they find the oppressed wherever they live. And so, when I spoke of Africa's stolen wealth, of our dignity trampled, of the chains disguised as contracts, those words did not remain in New York. They crossed the oceans. They returned home to Africa like migrating birds carrying the season of change. In Ouagadougou, in Bamako, in Niamey, in Kinshasa, in Dakar, young people replayed the fragments they could find. They passed them phone to phone, ear to ear, mouth to mouth. They said, "Listen, he spoke for us." Farmers in villages heard it. Students in universities heard it. Soldiers in barracks heard it. And each one said, "This is not just his voice, this is ours." The fire spread. 43 African nations felt it. Delegates whispered in corridors, "If Burkina Faso can stand, why not us? If Traore can name the empire, why should we remain silent?" The empire panicked. They sent envoys, they sent threats, they sent promises wrapped in sugar, but fire does not negotiate. Once lit, it consumes everything that feeds it. Brothers, I tell you this: what began as one voice at the UN is now a storm gathering across Africa. It is the drumbeat of sovereignty. It is the rising sun after a long colonial night. It is the memory of ancestors returning to remind us that freedom is not begged for, it is seized. Yes, they will call it dangerous. Yes, they will call it radical. But remember, they called every liberator dangerous. They called Lumumba dangerous. They called Sankara dangerous. They called Nkrumah dangerous. And now they call the roar of Africa dangerous because they know a continent on its feet cannot be chained again. From one voice to millions, from one chamber to an entire continent, the fire spreads. They tried to bury it, but the soil of Africa is fertile. And from that soil, rebellion grows like the sunrise. I told them in that hall, and I tell you now, we are no longer a whisper. We are thunder. We are no longer scattered sparks. We are fire. We are no longer bowed shadows. We are the dawn. And dawn, brothers and sisters, cannot be stopped. Brothers, sisters, comrades across the world, you have heard the words they tried to silence. You have felt the fire they tried to bury. This is more than a speech. It is a signal, a warning, a beginning. Do not let it die here. Carry it forward. Share it with your brothers, your sisters, your children, your friends. Let the roar echo from village to city, from Africa to America, from Paris to London, from the deserts to the seas. Because the empire fears not one man, but mil. Lions awakened. And if you are watching this now, you are part of that awakening. Stand with us. Rise with us. Do not just watch history. Make it. Subscribe now so you never miss the secrets they hide and the truths they fear. Share this message so the chains break faster. Join this movement so Africa rises and the world remembers the dawn belongs to us. The empire has spoken long enough. Now the people speak, and our voice will never again be silenced.